All right, thank you very much for coming out. Is this going to be okay? Can you guys hear me back there? Can we call the meeting to order? We've got some volume. Are you okay back there? Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out. Looks like a pretty good turnout. There's still people flowing in, so I suspect that we're going to, if not fill all the seats, it's a great turnout. So thank you. And thanks to Jake Kulgachuk and thanks to Dennis Charette for doing the sound and video. At some point we will be able to actually post this on YouTube and probably our Facebook site so that everybody in the community is going to be able to see what's happened here tonight. So don't be shy. All the same, you know, everybody becomes a star at some point. No, not that loud, Dennis.
Colin wants it louder.
Colin Nicoy. Okay. First, I want to introduce to you Natalie Mera. Natalie is an old friend of mine. She's been the director of the Ontario Health Coalition for the last 13 years. We've worked quite hard together on a number of campaigns, and Natalie's been up here a couple of times actually, in meetings in Matheson, here in Iroquois Falls in the past, with not quite as big a crowd. I think back in the day when we were waving the flag saying that we got problems with our healthcare system, people weren't really listening. I think you're all listening now. So I just want to open up with a few, basically kind of set the stage. From what I've seen and what I've experienced over the last year and a bit, and I know that most of you people are quite aware of these issues, but I think some of people in the community aren't quite sure what got us to where we are today. So I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of a backgrounder. The AGH took over the family health team. Madison General Hospital took over the family health team in January 2012 when Dr. Lupien felt that he could no longer look after it himself, not enough doctors to help out, whatever his reasons were, he decided to give it up. And the AGH board and administration took over the administration of the family health team. The annual in May 2012, we got word on the street that two board members, sitting board members, one was a vice chair, got ousted from the board. And quite frankly, nobody really knew why, or at least some people obviously knew why, or what the rationale was. And I attended, along with a whole bunch of other community members, to the Madison General Hospital annual general meeting held at the Manor in June of 2012. And quite frankly, it was an unqualified disaster. I have never seen a meeting run so poorly in my life. Answers were not given when questions were asked. It was actually a pretty sad excuse for democracy in the town of Iroquois Falls, I must say. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, did you ever watch Question Period?
Then came the issue of memberships, where people couldn't buy memberships at the door, as had been the case for many years running. For some reason, at the annual general meeting of 2012, they weren't available. And they weren't available for months and months and months after that, and of course they only came out, if I'm not mistaken, February earlier this year. Just in time for us to buy our memberships for March 31st deadline. Of course, then there was allegations of fraud against doctors, against nurse practitioners, allegations of harassment and bullying in the workplace, which caused a lot of consternation in the community because we're a small, closely knit community. Sometimes we don't often think of ourselves as that way, but when something happens to one of our members, we tend to pull together. And I think that's what's happened here. So, in my mind, and we've done a lot of research and a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of evidence points to changes in management style that led to workplace harassment and bullying. And whether these are allegations of proven or not, I'm sure that with what's going on right now, we're going to get to the bottom of it. There's no two ways about that. On February earlier this year, Matheson and Cochrane voted for amalgamation on recommendation of the mixed board. And on March 5th, of course, we had the AGH wanted or sorry, Mix, the CEO wanted the AGH membership to also vote yes to amalgamation. There was a pretty organized opposition to that, and we were there en masse on the 5th. And as we all know, or should, people should know, that there was a motion put on the floor that basically said, let's defer this vote until the June annual general meeting, where the people from this community could actually have a vote, because there's a whole lot of people out there. I think it was pretty clear to some of the members inside that we were not very satisfied with the fact that we weren't allowed into those meetings. The general public was not allowed in. There was security there at the meeting at the Lion's Den. And yet, apparently in Cochrane and Matheson, the public was allowed to attend those meetings. It was strange that didn't happen here. And by the way, there's no security here tonight, just for your information. So don't get too rowdy, okay? So the very next day, we're having a meeting over at Rainey Boucher's place, and knock comes on the door, and Rainey is served with a lawsuit, as were another 8 people the very next day. So obviously they had this in their pocket, and the presumption from our perspective is simply because they didn't get their way, take this. So that's when the coalition came together, and we decided it was time that we help our own, because there's something wrong and we need to fix it. So of course we've all read the stories in the Enterprise since then, some of them not quite factual, twisted truth or untruths. The 3 mayors came out, the 3 mayors of the communities came out with a press release at one point suggesting that they fully supported what the CEO was proposing in amalgamation. And yet I don't believe that's what people in this community ever wanted. And quite frankly, I don't believe that the other 3 boards, or the other 2 boards, knew all the details to what amalgamation entails. And had they had that information, I would wager that they would not have voted in favor of it. Of course, we've heard a lot of stories, and we're not going to be relaying those here tonight, because what we're here to talk about is what amalgamation is all about. The coalition requested a bunch of information from Northeast Lynn. Northeast Lynn is basically who funds, it's a government-appointed body that funds all hospitals and long-term care facilities in Northern Ontario. And in this area, it's actually the Lynns, there's Lynns right across the province, but in our area, it's called the Northeast Lynn. And John Vantoff rose at Queen's Park to denounce the use of public funds and to basically launch this lawsuit. And he questioned the Minister of Health as to whether or not the government was prepared to protect the whistleblowers in Iroquois Falls. And I think that was a watershed moment. And the minister actually thanked him for the questions. And I would suggest that probably from that came the order from the Lynns to get KPMG, who is a very, globally renowned firm, to come in and do an investigation into the allegations of harassment and bullying in the workplace. At the same time, there's an ongoing OPP investigation into fraud, but we don't really know where that's going. Suspect that because we haven't heard much about it, I don't imagine that there's going to be anything proven. The final report from KPMG is expected to be delivered to the Lynn on April the 30th. There's been a number of people from the community, a number of employees, former employees, certainly a good majority of the people that were charged were interviewed, and a number of others. Today, if anybody's had an opportunity to read the Enterprise, there's a very serious allegation lodged against somebody, again, constant attack by the CEO of Mix, he's CEO of all the hospitals in the region and the CEO of Mix. And quite frankly, I'm not convinced at all. I'm not here to call him anything that he may decide he wants to sue me for, but I don't believe the allegations at all. And I'm pretty sure that most of you people know who we're talking about. And I think, you know, the public opinion is pretty squarely in favor of the people who are being harassed and beat up in this case. And I think at the end of the day, we're all going to find out just who is telling the truth and who isn't. In fact, I'm convinced we will. Just before I introduce or turn it over to Natalie to give her spiel, we are planning a fundraiser. There's already been one bill for legal fees that have come in, and it's, you know, as one would expect, is not cheap, and it's just going to escalate from here. None of the 9 are rich. This is an unnecessary and, quite frankly, embarrassing lawsuit. Should never have happened. And I'm sure it will, at the end of the day, be proven to be unethical for one thing, but certainly will be frivolous and vexatious is what we'd like to call it. But I think it's going to be dropped. I don't have any doubt about that. Basically, it was just to try to keep the loudest people in the community. Fortunately, I wasn't in town when this was happening. So there is a fundraiser planned for May the 10th and 11th out in Porpoise. So we're doing a massive yard sale out there, and there's going to be some incredibly decent stuff for people to come out to, and hopefully you all will, and pass the word around and come on out. But also show your support in any way you can. There's a little half page back here that says how you can make a donation directly into the Caisse Populaire. We're researching ways that we can do stuff online, but it's simply just walk in there and say that you want to make a donation to the Iroquois Falls Coalition fundraising, and they'll be happy to take your money. And it doesn't matter how big or how small. We'd be happy to take it. Unfortunately, we can't give you tax receipts, but anyway, it's certainly needed and it's certainly appreciated. We have requested the membership list. We've requested what the voting rights of those members are going to be, because I presume there's probably a much larger membership base this year than ever in the past. I would imagine that there's probably hundreds out there, but they've not published that membership list. It would be nice if we could get that answer sooner than later, but they have not answered any of our requests for this membership list. We also asked them to have a meeting, and I'm talking about to the AGH, to come in and explain to the community what the benefits of amalgamation were. And we gave them to the end of the month. Well, by the end of last week, we figured it looks like they're not, you know, the enterprise came out last week, there was no announcement of a public meeting, and therefore we figured we'd better get one going, because you people need to know what the truth is. So that's why we invited Natalie here, and she's going to talk a little bit about the undemocratic measures that are being applied through the bylaws, actually, are a real disaster. And we have to not only buy a membership, but at the end of the day, we have to exercise our right to vote. It's one thing that we do often, too often, is we don't go out and actually vote for what we believe in. But in June the 12th, we better be there. Otherwise, we might end up with something that we really don't want. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to my colleague here, Natalie Mera, and I'm sure she'll entertain you even better than I am. She's amazing. This girl, if it wasn't for Natalie and the work that she's done with the coalitions across Ontario, our healthcare system would be in far worse shape than it is today, and that's a fact. I can vouch for that, and I'm sure anybody else that's worked with her will tell you the same. So without further ado, Natalie.
Thanks, Pen. So thank you very much for having me, and I should say that I'm going to try and sort of be succinct, brief, and we'll open it up to questions. So because I imagine people have a lot of questions about what some of this stuff means. So you know, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background, so you know who the heck I am coming into town, and why we are involved in this. So the Ontario Health Coalition, we were born, along with coalitions across the country, by Tommy Douglas. It was the Save Medicare Conference. It was held, I think, in the 1980s, and it was around the extra billing scandal that was happening in the 1980s, where physicians were charging the public health system, but then charging patients on top. And there was a real worry that Medicare, the Canada Health Act, was being eroded. And so the coalitions were set up to protect public Medicare under the principles of the Canada Health Act. And as the years have gone by, we have responded to different threats to the public healthcare system. Privatization as it arose in the 1990s, two-tier healthcare. Now it's really the offloading and cuts to hospital services, the shrinking of the scope of Medicare, where it's being cut particularly for long-term care, where you no longer can get those services in hospitals, so they're no longer covered under OHIP. You have to pay out of pocket to get them, and so on. So we try and fight to protect public Medicare, single-tier public Medicare for everybody, based on need, not based on how rich you are, under the principles of the Canada Health Act that was won really a generation ago. And recently in Ontario, one of the things that really has become an issue is the loss of our democratic structures, the democracy of our healthcare system. Not too long ago, all hospital boards in Ontario that were for secular hospitals, the non-Catholic hospitals, were elected. In a number of cases, they were on the municipal ballot. People would elect the hospital board members right there. Usually there would be someone from the local bank or what have you who would be the treasurer. And people wanted hospitals that would be well run, that were fiscally responsible, that would manage our money well and provide the most services, the best services that we could get for our communities. And that's how our hospital system has really developed for years. But in recent years, not just in hospitals, but all across the board, the governance, the sort of bodies that overrule, that oversee healthcare and its funding and so on, have been becoming less and less and less democratic. And in a number of cases, that is actually to facilitate cuts and movement of services out of town and transfers and privatization. For the last 5 years, I've worked trying to protect the small and rural hospitals across Ontario, with some success, I should say, but it became clear a few years ago.
Sorry.
That's all. No worries. So it became clear a few years ago that there was an intention to close down a number of small rural hospitals that had been amalgamated in the late 1990s to larger hospital sites. So in Niagara, there was a plan to close down 2 entire hospitals in Fort Erie and Port Colborne, towns of 40,000 and 20,000 people respectively. There is a plan to close down the emergency department in Wallaceburg and all the acute care beds except for 3 that would only be used for short-term patients and then transfer them to Chatham. There's a plan to close down the Shelburne Hospital, the Berks Falls Urgent Care Center, and a number of other, the emergency department in Petrolia, a number of other small and rural hospitals across the province. And so we became very, very active in trying to protect those services. As you know, and this, I feel very strongly about this, the hospital is one of those entities that is the center of a community. They are absolutely necessary to the life of the community, to the ongoing development of the community, both the economic development and the social development. They're necessary not only to save people's lives and protect our health and longevity, they're necessary as we age in order to have a bed that is close to our hometown and our support systems. It's only humane, I think, to allow people to age as close to home as possible. And the closure of these hospitals and schools and other things in rural communities really is a threat to the future of those communities. I think everyone who I've met across the province feels very strongly that way, and there really is a movement afoot to try and protect those communities and services. And so that's my background. Before I was the director of the Ontario Health Coalition, I was the executive director of the Epilepsy Association, a not-for-profit charitable group in southeastern Ontario, and before that I did my university at Queen's. And I was really happy that Ben called, actually, when this issue was coming up in your community, because we do have a lot of experience now seeing what's happened with the amalgamated hospitals. The move really to amalgamate hospitals started in the there were some structural changes in hospitals before, but I would say the systematic move towards merging hospitals into one corporation really started in the mid to late 1990s in a serious way in Ontario. And now we've had 15 years to see what's happened to those hospitals. And a few years ago, I did a tour across the province with a panel. It was a nonpartisan panel, and I should say our coalition is also nonpartisan. We don't tell people how to vote, we just tell you the truth as far as we see it from our experience, and you decide. So we had people who were involved in every political party, all of the political parties in Ontario. They were physicians, retired nurses, health professionals, and myself, and we traveled the whole province. We did, I think it was 20 towns, public hearings. We received an overwhelming response. This is all small and rural communities. I think we got 590 submissions, something like that. In every town there was, large groups of people came out, people gave oral presentations or gave us written submissions. And from that we compiled a report. But what we found as we traveled were a few things that I hadn't realized before. One was that the hospitals that had been amalgamated in the late 1990s, the smaller sites, the small and the rural sites of those hospitals were doing much worse than the standalone hospitals. They had lost services. Their services had been continually eroded over the years. They'd lost equipment that they'd fundraised for locally. In some cases, in Wallaceburg, for example, we were told that the community had raised, I can't remember how much, it was a huge amount of money to build a palliative care unit in the hospital, only to have that unit closed down entirely within just a couple of years. They had lost beds, and then they were being told that their hospitals were no longer viable. They couldn't attract physicians, they didn't have the range of services, etc., or that their emergency departments were no longer viable and needed to be closed down, etc. So, whereas when we went to hospitals that were freestanding hospitals that were not amalgamated, so they hadn't been merged into corporations with other hospitals, that was not the case. They were doing much better. They had a broader range of services. They were generally doing financially better, and they didn't express the same problems. In every case, the communities in the amalgamated hospitals that we went to, the small and the rural communities, were completely alienated. They felt that they had no voice on their hospital boards. They had no idea that in some cases, they had local advisory committees, so their board with the amalgamation was eradicated. There's one hospital board left for all of the amalgamated hospitals, mostly centered in some other town. And then the other towns were supposed to have advisory boards. Nobody knew, or advisory committees. In most cases, people didn't know who was on them. In some cases, we were told that members of the advisory committees had died and had never been replaced, or that they didn't even live in the community. I mean, these advisory committees were really not functioning as advocates for their communities in any tangible way, or at least not in any way that people reported to us. And so we became very concerned that these hospitals in particular were the most under threat of major losses of services, that is, losses of acute care beds, of significant numbers of beds, of their emergency departments, of other vital services, such that it really endangered the future viability of their hospitals. And in some cases, they were under threat of being closed down entirely. And I have to say that while doing this work, I have been lucky to meet some of the best people I've ever met in the province. I mean, people who, like your group here, are just dedicated to their local communities, who want to build their local communities and fight for them. And I think we should probably recognize that the local group here, I don't know if you want to stand the local coalition here, just so that people can recognize you, because I think you really are heroes, like all the other people around the province who are fighting to save their local services. Will you stand up or wave or something?
And there's some at the back as well.
Thank you so much for the work that we're doing. So I'm just here to tell you, what is amalgamation? Why are we concerned about it? Why do we think it's a bad idea? Why are there so many communities now fighting to de-amalgamate, and what's sort of happening regarding that? So I thought I would tell you quickly. I spent the last week actually talking with activists and the mayors and councillors and so on in the communities of Trenton and Picton, where they're now fighting to de-amalgamate from Quinte Healthcare, which is dominated by the Belleville Hospital, the larger hospital. All three hospitals are losing some services under cuts, but the major cuts are coming to the smaller hospitals. In Picton, about 40% of the hospital beds are under, there's a proposal to close them down. That would leave them, I think, with 9 beds left in that hospital. They have a lot of doctors in that community who are willing to work there, but they're afraid that they're going to have to leave if there are no services left in that hospital. In Trenton, they also are facing very significant cuts, and this is the second round of very significant cuts. And the fear is, of course, the ultimate closure of one or both of those hospital sites. I was supposed to go to Perth last night. I didn't quite make it, but where they were holding a town hall meeting, because in Perth and Smiths Falls, two amalgamated small rural hospitals, they're losing 12% of their hospital beds. In fact, they're closed down now, and a whole array of other services. In Niagara, Ontario, we have a coalition there. We're working with the municipalities, some of the municipalities who are trying to fight the cuts, and local activist groups in every town down there. But they're trying to close down 5 community hospitals in Niagara, in Welland, Port Colborne, Fort Erie, Niagara Falls, and Niagara-on-the-Lake, which would leave only 1. And there is a promise that there would be 1 hospital to replace all 5 somewhere down the road, but nobody has approved that. And we have our serious doubts about that. They've been trying to close those hospitals for a long time, at least the 2 in the southern tier. And so the threat of loss of service in communities that are quite large, actually have quite significant populations, and that are no closer or further than you are from the other hospitals in this region, is very real. That is happening across Ontario now, and it's happening more in the amalgamated hospitals than in the not amalgamated hospitals, in my experience. So big cuts, rationing of service. The government has started on what they're calling a 5-year austerity budget plan. So last year was the first year. And in this austerity budget, they're trying to constrain funding for public services to less than the rate of inflation. Well, if your household funding, your income, is less than the rate of inflation, increases at less than the rate of inflation, what does that mean for you? Yeah, you either go into deficit or you have to cut services. Hospitals are not allowed by law to run deficits, so they have to cut services. And the provincial auditor reported in June, just before the last provincial election, that the plan was to curtail, because these are sort of rollbacks in the growth of funding, hospital funding by over $1 billion over the first 3 years of this austerity plan. And so the reason that we're seeing such a very, very significant cuts that are happening disproportionately in the smaller hospitals is because we are under very, very tight budget constraints across Ontario. So the context in which the amalgamation is being proposed here is a context in which hospitals are being forced to shrink, cut services and shrink. And I don't know what that means locally, because I don't think anyone has sort of come out with any sort of concrete plans or what have you, but I'm just trying to give you the general context in which we're working. And so that's another sort of cause for concern to me. What is the rationale for amalgamation? So amalgamation is when you take 3 or 4, whatever, 2, 3, 4, 5, not small, not-for-profit hospitals, and even some large hospitals, and you get rid of their separate corporations, and you merge them into one corporation. They have then one set of bylaws, they have one board of directors, and one administration, etc. You, in your area, already have merged services. So you have one CEO, you have one, you have common purchasing, and a lot of the efficiencies of amalgamation have already been achieved here through that merging of services. So you don't have duplication of all of those functions across all of the 3 sites here. But you do still maintain your own separate hospital board. So amalgamation in your case really means the eradication of the 3 hospital boards and the replacement with 1 hospital board. I understand that in none of the public meetings that the hospital held, was there any sort of concrete proposal made to the communities as to how they would be represented after amalgamation. In some communities, there is a local advisory committee that's formed. But as I say, the experience of the communities that we've worked with is that those local advisory committees really don't have much power, and they're not real advocates. In fact, I remember distinctly a woman now who died. She was fighting cancer, but she at the same time fought very hard to protect her own local hospital. She's from Glencoe, Ontario, and she said to me, what we lost in amalgamation was we lost our advocate. There's no advocate for us anymore. The hospital is dominated by the larger site, which is in Strathroy in that case, and we just continually lose services to that hospital. And that stuck with me because we heard that over and over and over as we traveled the province doing our public hearings. So what's wrong from our point of view? It's a loss of local governance. It's a loss of local democracy. I understand that in a lot of communities when things are going well, it's not like people are lining up to join the hospital board. But when when cuts are being discussed, when proposals for restructuring and so on are happening, the community is absolutely interested in what's going on in the local hospitals. And that is the context in which we're operating right now. So to lose your democratic governance, your power of advocacy at that time is not the best thing, I don't think, for a community to do. The loss of service, which I already covered. You also lose some legal status. When you are an amalgamated site of a hospital, you're like a department in that hospital. You don't have your own budget, you're not a separate legal entity. In Petrolia, for example, where the community is fighting hard to de-amalgamate from Blue Water Health, the Sarnia-dominated hospital amalgamation, they're worried because they're under constant threat of losing their emergency department, and they've lost a whole host of other services in that. And they are furious. They're not even listed as a hospital anymore in the Hospitals Act. They're not treated as a separate hospital. They're like a department, as Helen Havlick, the leader of that group, would say, of the other hospital. And when the decisions are made about moving services around and so on, the hospital does not have to go to anybody. I mean, it used to be, before these LHINs were brought in, the Minister of Health didn't even have the power to close down a hospital. The legislature had to do it. In fact, when the Harris government came in order to give themselves the power to order amalgamations and hospital closures, etc., they passed it in an omnibus bill, a giant piece of legislation about all kinds of things. It was kind of snuck in there, made very public, but they started the restructuring commission, and they gave the commission the power to make recommendations, and they gave their government the power, but it had to be decided by cabinet, to order closures and amalgamations and so on and so forth. In the new legislation, the LHIN has the power to transfer services from one entity to another, right? So if you're a separate hospital, the LHIN, the Local Health Integration Network, the body that governs the region of healthcare from where?
Huntsville to
doesn't it go to
halfway to Thunder Bay
White River or something like that?
There's another.
Right, but it covers all the way, I think, over to White River. So that body, which is an appointed body, they're appointed by cabinet, they don't answer to the community, they're not elected, they make the decisions about service transfers. But once you lose your corporate status, if you're not your own corporation, the hospital makes that decision. about moving services among its various sites or departments, except in cases where the LHIN has required the hospital to, give them the power to make that decision. It's been a legal gray area, and it's been a problem all across Ontario because the legislation never foresaw what would happen in the cases of transfers of major services in amalgamated hospitals. So you lose your legal status, and I think that is significant in a number of ways. And then of course there's also, and I don't know what the situation is here, I read in the newspaper that the board had sent a letter to the LHIN requesting clarification, but in the case where once you've amalgamated, you're too large to be considered a small or rural hospital anymore, you also lose that special funding. And I see that there's a letter clarifying that at this time that wouldn't happen in the newspaper from the LHIN. So I'll just give you a few examples, and I'm going to end very quickly, I hope. So in Shelburne, Ontario, the entire hospital was closed down. It was closed. All the beds were closed. The services supposedly transferred to the Orangeville Hospital, but of course the Orangeville Hospital doesn't have the room or capacity to take all of those patients. It has major backlogs, etc. And so they lost their hospital beds in Shelburne. That was done that's an amalgamated hospital dominated by the Orangeville site, which is the larger site of those two. That was done, the municipalities, all of them, there's a bunch of them involved in that because they all are served by that Shelburne hospital site. They opposed many of them, but they weren't even able to get the written details of the plan to close the services. In that case. In Berks Falls, despite all 12 municipalities being opposed, they closed down the urgent care center, which is what remained of their local hospital. That one's amalgamated to Huntsville, Bracebridge, Gravenhurst. That's the group. In Kincardine, there's a local group that's fighting to save their hospital. It's amalgamated, and it seems that most of the money or most of the services are sort of moving towards Walkerton in that group. And the group there tried to get separate financial statements for their own hospital to try and challenge some of the things that were being said by the hospital CEO, the former hospital CEO there. And they were not able to get a separate financial statement. They were told that there is no such thing. Now that they're amalgamated, there's no, but I don't know if that's true or not, but they certainly were not able to get that information. On the other hand, if you look at hospitals like the Napanee Hospital, this is a small hospital, but it's doing incredibly well. It's expanded services. It has a vision of growth, actually, and a culture of that. The Winchester Hospital, which we went to, also has a very broad range of services, way broader than the small amalgamated hospitals that we saw. It's not very far from large centers either, so it's not about distance. But it certainly did seem that having its own separate governance, its own local advocacy really did make a difference to the services in those communities. So now what's happening? Well, all across Ontario is the pressure for deeper and deeper and deeper cuts hits. As those cuts hit disproportionately on the smaller communities, communities are fighting to de-amalgamate from their amalgamations that were forced in the 1990s. And so, for example, next month in June, we're going to be holding a mass rally at Queen's Park with busloads of people from all kinds of small and rural communities whose main call is to save their services and de-amalgamate from their amalgamated hospital corporations. So there's a few things that I think could be done here. One is, why would anyone vote on amalgamating when no information has been provided whatsoever about what the structure would be, what your local governance would even look like under an amalgamation? Nobody has even given you. It's like asking someone to vote to form a new country without a constitution. Essentially, it's the same thing. Well, wait a minute. What is it that you're joining? What representation would you have? What assurances do you have for protections of services? What assurances do you have that your budget would be protected? Those sorts of things. I don't support the idea that communities fight against each other for services. But in the case now, we want to try and save the most services in the most communities possible because they really are under significant threat. I just wanted to leave you with some hope. There are communities, even recently, that have de-amalgamated from troubled corporations. St. Joseph Island near Sault Ste. Marie, there was a threat to close down Matthews Memorial Hospital there. That corporation is dominated by the Sioux Area Hospital. Services kept getting transferred out to there. And ultimately, as they tried to save themselves under tight budget, their proposal was to just close down Matthews Memorial. The municipalities got together on St. Joseph Island. They met with the municipalities in Thessalon and somewhere else, maybe Blind River, I'm not sure, somewhere along the shore there, and they de-amalgamated from Sault Ste. Marie, and they joined in with a couple of other hospitals with a much clearer agreement and assurances. Georgetown Hospital, a few years ago, de-amalgamated when there was a threat of closing their pediatrics services, de-amalgamated from the Brampton Hospital. In the 1990s, the group, which is now called the Huron-Perth Health Alliance, which it was Stratford, Seaforth, Goderich, Listowel, one of those, and St. Mary's, two of those, Exeter, 6 I think. Anyways, 3 of those hospitals left that alliance, and 2 of them are on their own now and have their own separate governance. So it's not like it hasn't happened, it is happening. There's movement on this all across Ontario, and I hope this is useful information for you.
Thanks, Natalie. Okay, so at the end of the day, the question is, what do we want? What is the coalition up against? I think we've kind of laid that out a little bit for you tonight. It's a tough row. There's no doubt it's going to be a tough fight. But I think we're up for it. We have the evidence in our hands, and we're going to continue to dig for the truth. And I'm sure that we will, at the end of the day, be able to prove exactly what the heck has gone on around here. We're going to get to the bottom of all the allegations that have been, people have been accused of things that whether they did or didn't do, and this is all going to be coming out. We're not going to back down. We're not going to be gagged. We're not, as other communities have, by the way. Some of you may or may not know this, but this isn't Bruce's first rodeo. He's been to a lot of other communities. And there's a lot of communities out there that don't stand up and fight for what they, or can't anymore because of the deals that have been struck there. So what we want really at the end of the day, of course, we want to help with the lawsuit, help protect our own. We want to bring democracy back to the board. We want to eliminate, first off, identify and eliminate any conflicts of interest that are either apparent or very real with board members. We want to see 3 separate boards maintained in all 3 communities. And at the end of the day, we want to vote no for amalgamation, and that we want to maintain what we've got. There's no reason why we shouldn't. So with that, we're going to welcome questions from the audience. Please don't feel shy. Come on up. Ask whatever you want. And Natalie's the expert. I certainly am not. And that's why we brought Natalie up here from, by the way, she drove in from Iroquois this morning, so hopefully she'll be able to answer all your questions. I'm sure she's pretty good at it. Go ahead.
I just want to say that I just came back from Southern Ontario. I have some relatives that live in Port Hope, Ontario. Can they hear me back there?
Yep.
I asked that very question about amalgamation of hospitals, and this is what happened in Port Hope and Cobourg. Port Hope had a relatively new hospital. Cobourg had more of a dilapidated building. Today, Port Hope has no hospital, and Cobourg has it. A lot of politics went on there. So if you're sick, you either go to Cobourg, depending on what it is, or you go to Peterborough. Port Hope's all they have left now is a clinic. for healthcare. And I'm being honest, at first I thought amalgamation, because of budgets, and it might be a good idea, like from a financial point. That was my first opinion. But I can categorically say now, I say to everyone here, vote no for amalgamation.
Hi, Betty.
Good evening, Ben. Natalie, I'd like to thank you for coming here. I'd say for 90% of us, we're probably very, very pleased that you were here with your information. I've read the information that Ben has handed out, and it's very scary what's coming down the line if we go forward with the way things are going. And also, Ben, I think we are all glad that you were in Cuba, because if you wouldn't have been, you wouldn't be here doing this today. You'd be on the other side of the table. What I'd like to know is, we've been told that even if we don't vote for amalgamation, it's going to go forward anyways. The LHINs are going to force this to happen. What happens then?
Yeah.
Or can this happen?
Yeah, I read that in your paper that there had been a claim from the hospital that the LHIN was pushing this, and then the LHIN said, no, actually we are not. And I mean, the truth is, the ministry does want amalgamations. There's no question. Whether they would go so far as to force it, not totally clear to me. Certainly there's ways that communities can make it very difficult for them to do that. I mean, you could, for instance, hold a referendum, you know, depending on what happens in June, but you know, those sorts of things. And then, you know, they have no moral authority to override, you know, 90% of the adult population of the town. You know what I mean? So it makes it much more difficult. Also, because I think the issue of amalgamation is going to become a very big one. In the Conservatives' white paper, the Conservative Party's white paper, they're actually calling for amalgamation, further amalgamations of all of Ontario's hospitals. So there's like, what, 151, I think? I can't remember the total number, into 30 to 40 hospital corporations. So these would be giant hospital corporations with many, many sites. And so that is bound to be debated hotly as we lead into the next provincial election, which is rumored to be in the fall. And as all of these towns that are trying to de-amalgamate rise up, which is happening now, I think that this issue is going to become more and more hotly contested. That says to me that the ministry would be less likely to force an amalgamation at this time.
Do you think they're using us as an example?
No, I think they want amalgamations. I think they do want amalgamations.
No, but I mean, if we let this, if it happens here, then it will be basis for it to happen elsewhere.
Well, they forced amalgamations all over the province already in different areas, mainly in the late 1990s. You know, not so much now, although it's happening right now in Scarborough. They're trying to amalgamate the Scarborough hospitals against the will of, you know, thousands of people who are rising up in Scarborough right now about it. Again, because what they want to do is amalgamate and then rationalize the services. You know, one hospital does one thing, another does another, or whatever, and in some cases close down the smaller hospitals entirely. So, so I just think it's part of a trend. I don't think they're using you as an example per se, and I think that this is going to meet major pushback from people everywhere.
Thank you very much.
As Natalie has mentioned before, you know, this mixed group of health services has been around for a number of years. They've been in existence for about 15 years. So the efficiencies that could be derived from a potential amalgamation have already been realized, as she's indicated. You know, this is already in place. The only, you know, I was told at one point in time by a board member, because I asked very clearly, what are the benefits? Tell us what the benefits are. And the only answer was, we won't have to do 4 financial statements. We'll only have to do 1. Well, if that's all you're going to gain out of amalgamation, and we're going to lose democratic control of our hospital, then we got a problem on our hands.
But you also lose your board. You lose your board and you lose your separate budget.
Yeah.
Which is vital, yeah. I think.
Good to see you back at work, Ben. I was interviewed about a week ago by Oscar from KPM, whatever they're called.
KPMG?
And we had quite an interesting conversation, but he did tell me his firm has been involved investigating annexations and amalgamations pretty well across Canada. The bottom line is, they don't work. However, he did say, it's probably going to be forced upon you. That was their conclusion of it, eh? So he's the investigator in this thing.
Well, as Natalie suggested, maybe at the end of the day, we'll just have our own referendum. We'll see what the board has to say in June, and if they don't vote according to the wishes of this community, then we'll have our own referendum, and we'll tell them what our decision is.
Right. Well, I have the mic, Ben. He also did tell me that he had interviewed several of the current staff at the hospital. Not one complaint. I said, do you know why? Because they've been threatened with firing, that's why.
Either that or they were the ones that were sent. Thanks, Al. Good point. One thing I wanted to mention when I was talking about John Vantoff rising in the House, I forgot to mention the fact that he would have been here tonight. He sent his greetings. He would have been here, but he had to stay in Toronto for an important vote tonight, so just so you know.
Thank you for coming, Natalie. And thank you, Ben, with your coalition for organizing this. Is there any evidence to show that these bigger corporations are more fiscally sound?
You mean the amalgamated corporations?
Yes.
Oh, no, I don't think so at all. I mean, there's no, study that I know of that systematically compares them against the non-amalgamated ones. But, from my knowledge, we just put together a list of all the hospital cuts and deficits that are happening in Ontario. And, I mean, there are major deficits all over the place in the amalgamated hospitals. There are also major deficits in some of the non-amalgamated hospitals. I mean, everyone is facing this very severe funding curtailment. But then there are some of the standalone hospitals are actually doing better. I mean, some of them just never, the funding was never right from amalgamation on, and so they're just sort of, have been, like Niagara, have been spinning out with deficits in, 10 million, 15 million for years and years and years. But I don't think, to be honest with you, amalgamation, like the structure is one piece. I think it's a vital piece because because having your own separate budget means, I think, some protections. Because having your own legal entity and your own board, I think, means some protections, but it's not the only thing that will save your services as they get under deep, more and more pressure to cut. And that pressure is going to be there regardless of amalgamation or not. It's just that where they're dominated by one larger hospital or by a hub, as they're calling Cochrane right now, the hub here, then, the smaller places, it's not like you're necessarily smaller than Cochrane, but if they've determined that that's the hub, then, you do risk sort of a constant stream of services, et cetera, off. And I want to be careful not to speculate about something, that I'm just telling you what's happened in other places and what it might mean for here. I can't say that there's a plan to do that or anything because there isn't, to my knowledge. But that is what's happened in every other place that I know of where there is a larger hospital that dominates. And they are trying to go to this hub and spoke model, as they call it. So one sort of major hospital in the area that has all the services, and then other small hospitals that have a much more limited range of services, and then they're also closing the smallest.
But isn't our hub the Timmins Hospital?
Well, yeah, I think, but I was reading when I went through all of the newspapers, reading all of the articles and everything that had been put out about what was going on here, and they were referring to Cochrane in terms of healthcare as the hub. So I don't know what that, I think we need to do some freedom of information requests to find out, to get some of the documentation from the LHIN and from the local hospital board about what has been going on behind the scenes in terms of planning, because we don't know.
The other thing that we all know is that, AGH, by and large, and the mixed group are fiscally sound. So what's the point? What is the real point? Ready?
I'm not really happy with you because you're reading my mind. As a next board member, I can tell you this, and when you talk about being everybody's got money. This year, the Anson General, Cochrane, and Matheson finished with a surplus. Why would we want to eliminate that and put it in one budget? Like, it doesn't make sense. Things are going good financially. Why would you want to take a chance on getting really rubbed out?
Good point.
And sorry, just take a little caveat. It's not that I do wish Cochrane well in terms of, boosting its services as well. We're not, but I don't want you to lose services to another town. I want to protect the level of services at least that people have, and hopefully address some of the service gaps that people are facing.
Is Cochrane and Matheson going to change their minds or get on board, or?
Well, they've already voted.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, the coalitions discussed the idea about going to the other two councils, including our own council, and actually explain to them what Natalie has just explained to us, and say, why did you do this?
Yeah.
And do you really know what you've bought or what you're buying? Daddy, you want to say something?
Even if there are amalgamations that are fiscally sound, does it mean there's better patient care?
That's a good point.
That's what we're concerned about.
That's a good point. There's one thing that we know about in this community, come on, Rob, is that we do have great service at our hospitals, as best as we possibly can get under the circumstances. And these nurses and doctors are under an immense amount of pressure, and it shouldn't be that way. Ron?
Thanks, Natalie, for coming up and giving us all this information. It's relevant and very informative. And thank you, Ben, for staging this. And I think we need more of this. I think we need more meetings like this to get more of our community out and informed about what's going on. My question is about boards. In other organizations, other hospitals and such forth, how are boards formed? Are they nominated by members of the community and voted on by members of the community, or are they nominated by members of the boards and voted on by members of the boards? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, this is one of the other things we found in our tour, or at least it sort of really brought it to light for us. When the amalgamations of the hospitals happened in the mid to late 1990s, when they formed the new corporation, they rewrite the bylaws. And what we didn't know at the time, and didn't become evident until much later when people started losing services and trying to figure out how did they get their hospital board to stand up for their services, they rewrote the bylaws to eliminate democratic elections for their local hospital boards. So now this is what it looks like in Ontario. The Catholic hospitals are under the governance of the Catholic hospital, so it's a separate entity. They didn't have local elections ever. But the secular hospitals, the non-religious hospitals, mostly did have elected boards a decade and a half ago. The amalgamated ones were wiped out in the mid to late 1990s, and since then, the current government has been, and the Ontario Hospital Association, I should say, have been pushing rewriting bylaws and eliminating elected hospital boards ever since. Anytime they send in a supervisor to take over a local community hospital, that supervisor has the legal power of the membership, the board, everyone, and they rewrite the bylaws. And the way that they do it, because under the Corporations Act in Ontario, which hospitals are under, you have to call for nominations from the floor. You have to have an election when you have an annual general meeting of the corporation. So the way that they do it is that they write the bylaws so that the board, the members have to apply. The board can select the membership, and then the membership elects the board. In some cases, the board is the membership, the only membership, and then they elect themselves. It's so disgustingly, profoundly undemocratic, it's shocking. But it's now, I would say, maybe half or even the majority of hospitals have gone that way. And it's something that, one of the three key things that we're fighting along with all the groups across the province.
So to change bylaws within the board, they can do that within their own, or do you have to put that out to the public?
No, see, the way that, normally, the way that they have to, in order to change the bylaws, they have to follow the process that's set out in the bylaws and in the Corporations Act. And so usually there has to be a notice of motion to the membership, and then the members are invited to the annual general meeting or the special meeting in order to approve the proposed change. But in most cases, I would say people in the towns that I've been to had no idea that it happened. Whether those meetings weren't publicized, whether it was never explained to them what the change was or whatever, it happened without them. In some cases, it happened despite the overwhelming opposition. Like in Midland, we I think had 1,200 memberships or something like that to the hospital, and they wiped out all of the memberships. And set up an undemocratic hospital board that appoints itself, basically. And what does that mean? In reality, I don't think that this is in the interest of anyone. I think the government is doing it because they're exerting control over the hospital boards to shut up about the hospital cuts, to toe the line and not raise a stink when there are hospital cuts forced. And certainly all across Ontario, what we've seen is hospital CEOs coming out and saying, oh yeah, we may be cutting 12% of the beds in the community, but these are not needed services, or what have you. And the hospital board, the hospitals have been largely silent about the cuts. In the mid-1990s, the hospitals led the fight to save their local services. It was a major problem for the government. So I think what's happened is the government learned from that. They've wiped out the municipal leaders on hospital boards. Like in Quinte, they actually sent in a supervisor and they kicked the mayors off the hospital board because they were standing up for their local services. And then they formed an undemocratic, unelected hospital board. It's in order to force the cuts through.
From the last meeting that I was here, I think I'm only allowed 3 questions this time.
Sorry, I talked too much.
If there was no information given out to the members within our community, would these bylaws be void?
Would they be legal?
Yeah, would they be legal?
I'm going to talk to the lawyers that we work with and see if either there's a class action or some kind of pro bono case or something they can do about this, because I don't really, it seems to me, I was reading your bylaws. It's clear in your bylaws now that the board, that you can apply for membership, but the board determines who the members are. The clause that says that the board determines who the members are does not give any criteria, so the board can just pick and choose. So the members that the board chooses then presumably elect the board at the next meeting, if that's the process that they follow. It should be under the Corporations Act. So you don't have, in this set of bylaws, you have a process wherein, the board picks the people who vote for them, and then
The answer to that question is we're still researching. We'll find out though.
Whoever votes for them, nobody votes for them, they're already picked out.
But as I understand it, lots of people here have gone and bought a membership and have not been informed whether they really are a member or not. I think operating on the assumption that you are a member, going to the AGM and voting is crucial, regardless. And then if it turns out that it's completely undemocratic, then deal with it at that point.
Was not a card, but keep your receipt.
Go ahead.
What is the sense of having a board if the CEO decides who's going to be on the board?
Exactly.
Can't answer that one. I think you just got your answer. It's not right. It's simply not right. It's immoral.
Okay, I lied again.
It's okay. Carry on.
I forgot the question. I really did.
Well, while you're thinking,
Do it quick, your hospital's closing.
I'm certainly no lawyer, but I gotta say, if in reviewing the bylaws and seeing the power that the board has given themselves, And in speaking to some of the people who were on the board at the time, if they didn't know what the heck they were voting on, then we got a problem on our hands. And the board has a problem on their hands. That's a fact. And we will challenge them. Got it, Ron?
Ding! Natalie, can you tell us where our constitutional rights come into play here? Do we have any rights within this?
Well, you have the right to freedom of speech.
Sorta. Sorta.
Don't go away, Matt. Don't go away.
I don't have a question per se, but I do have a comment. Since that we are in Legion Hall, it's kind of ironic to me that we're discussing this type of draconian policies. Our fallen soldiers and forefathers must be rolling in their graves for fighting so hard to have our rights protected, and this is what we're left with.
Good point.
It's unbelievable.
Welcome, Tori Delorier.
Good evening. Is it true that only corporate members can vote?
Yes.
So the regular members cannot vote?
No, those are corporate members. If you paid $5, you get.
So
you should be able to get to vote.
So how many people last time could have voted?
They didn't tell us how many are on the list. We're still looking to find out how many are there. And we want to know that because we want to be able to encourage them to go out and vote. And we will continue to encourage them whether we get the list or not.
Okay, thanks.
And by the way, Tori, thanks for coming out. I guess, is there there any other council members we can recognize here tonight? Apparently not.
Those bylaws that you were reading from, were they always like that?
No.
When were they amended? It should be on the end of the document if it's legal.
You're right.
A couple of years ago, as far as we know.
It says June.
These revised in June 2011, but are
2011. So Rainey, were those bylaws the same when you were there?
Yep.
That he can appoint anybody as, the CEO can appoint any member and the members had no vote whatsoever?
The board appoints the members.
The board appoints.
The board decides who the membership is, if that's what you're.
So that was amended in June 2011. According to that document.
That's what this document says, but there are also amendments from June 2012, so I'm not quite sure that this is actually, yeah. So the document that we have in terms of membership is exactly the same as the 2012. There were some changes in the bylaws.
But you don't have a copy of the new bylaws?
I don't have it here, to be honest with you. I give you the wrong set.
Okay.
It's 2012 just actually changed a couple of small things. They tweaked it, but the actual membership changes, from my understanding, that stuff happened in 2011. Correct me if I'm wrong, board members were there. We'll have to ask them whether they knew.
The board members were there, but was that voted on?
Oh, I don't know.
At a meeting? Actually,
the
bylaws can't be changed
Oh, you're talking
unless
about
it was.
at the AGM?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Was it voted on?
I don't know. I wasn't at the AGM in 2011.
You gotta have minutes and it has to be voted on. If it's gonna be a legal document,
Yes, we
the
understand.
information should be there.
We'll be looking into it.
Okay, thanks.
But if you're a working staff at the hospital, okay, should you be allowed to be a member like that then?
Well, you're not, except the CEO. The CEO is a de facto member of the board.
I understand that. I'm talking about other ones that just was put in there again.
Oh, I see. Should an employee be a member of the board? It's against the bylaws.
Well, then.
Isn't it?
I don't know. I haven't read your bylaws all the way through.
Who's an
the government made some changes recently because the physicians always had
special status,
particular status and places on the board, and the provincial government moved to try and reduce the physicians' powers on the board in the last couple of years. And I honestly cannot remember the details. I'll have to look into that, and maybe if I email it to Ben, can you sort of send it out or something? We'll make sure that we try and get that information.
Yeah, because I'd sure like to know. A lot of us would like to know in here.
But that only relates to the physicians.
And I have to say, I'm not an expert on the bylaws, but if you look at the bylaws, sorry, if you look at, sorry, Mike. If you look at the bylaws, there are a number of positions that are elected. There is a number of appointments. So, for example, I believe, if my memory serves me right, there is a municipal rep, which comes, I believe, from council. But there's a number of ex officio positions that are generally held by staff, and that might be where the confusion is coming in. And
Ex officio means they don't vote.
No, actually, Natalie, you have to look at it, because in this case, ex officio members do vote, and they have the full rights. And I was stunned because in all of my experience, I had never seen, having been a staff person assigned to a number of boards, as affects ex officios, ever having the full rights of a director. And if you look in the bylaw, and anyone, it is the one piece of information that is posted on the website. The bylaws actually indicate that ex officio staff, which are staff members, do in fact have full voting rights. So you have the secretary of the board, who is the CEO, and you have a number of staff positions that also have full voting rights. And so there seems to be, disproportionate weight on the board in terms of the ability of people to vote independently. The other thing that is very disturbing about the bylaws the first time I read them, and never having known Colin and met Rainey after about 35 years, I read and I said, well, of course you were thrown off the board, because as a board member, as a director of the board, you can't really question anything that's going on the board. So they absolutely can remove you for asking questions of accountability. And sorry, Mike, now that I'm up here. So I think that for a number of us, the issue is about the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency. There are a number of us who have been asking for minutes, even the quality of the minutes could be questionable, but we have been asking for minutes to be merely posted on the website, which under the bylaw they're required, under the Public Hospital Services Act they're required, under a number of other pieces of legislation, including, the Broader Sector Accountability Act, they're all supposed to be there. If you look at other hospitals, you can find them. There's one approved minute under the Anson General Hospital Board posted from November the 20th, 2012. So, I think that's what people are upset about. You're talking about moving into a sphere where there's less accountability when there is no accountability now. So how are we ever supposed to know what is going to happen, to our hospital? There's no minutes. We can't read who has made decisions. We can't verify that there's been no conflict of interest because there's no minutes. There's no transparency. And nobody seems to want to answer any questions. Sorry.
Thanks, baby. Excellent. Good job. Pull it up. It'll go up.
Forget it. Natalie, Ben, thank you very much for this most interesting information session. You sit down. First off, I'd like to say that on June the 12th, the current board will vote on the amalgamation. Let's do the scenario that the current board forces the amalgamation upon the people of this community, even though they're seeing the turnout here that is overwhelmingly against it. But they probably will force it upon us. Looking forward from that point on, I'd like you to address the community here tonight and possibly give them what kind of actions and how much time frame they would have to address that. Meaning, can this amalgamation be voted on June the 12th and by June 29th it's done and there's no time for us to get by? What's our timetable? And then what would be the best approach for this community to take to stand up to the tyrannical judgment of the board.
So, how many people here have paid their membership this year? Sort of interest. Yeah.
Have paid.
Oh, good. Okay, so there's half. Yeah.
Pretty well, everybody?
Oh,
Good.
good. Okay.
Good.
And how many people, just if you don't have to put up your hand or whatever, but would vote against amalgamation if they had the opportunity?
That's nice to see.
So, I mean, I don't know what they intend to do at this June 12th meeting, but so step one, I think it's crucial that everyone here who has voting rights or even who's bought a membership, whether they've told you you're a member or not or whatever, goes to that meeting. And there's no reason why anyone who hasn't can't go and watch what's going on. You know, that's normal. So that's number one. If for some reason things go, you know, they use some kind of procedure to stop the community from being able to vote against the amalgamation, or, you know, I don't know what they could do. Then my suggestion is that when faced with a situation where people take away your democratic rights, you enact them yourself. I'd call a community referendum. I'd hold a referendum. I'd, you know, have someone who is beyond reproach count the ballots, and I would use, you know, that to show how, make it so clear the lack of any moral credibility, you know, that anyone would have to force this on the community. Then you also need to take it to Queen's Park. You know, it needs to go to the legislature, because the trend here really is being set from on high. And so I do think that it's crucial that your local MVP and, you know, in whatever way you can sort of, you know, make the issue known at the legislature. The Minister of Health can intervene, the Premier can intervene. You know, there are places where you can get this stopped, and hopefully by then we would have made this a big enough issue that it's a hot potato and they don't want to go there in terms of forcing an amalgamation. In terms of how fast can they do it, I don't think that by, you know, it's kind of a complicated thing. What I read in the paper, you know, for what it's worth, because again, there's no information provided whatsoever. I don't know that they have a proposed structure set up. I don't know if they have proposed bylaws written. I don't know if any of that stuff is ready. It's impossible to know. But I sort of doubt that they would be able to, you know, within a couple days, you know, have the amalgamation done and so on and so forth. Moreover, you know, I need to talk to some lawyers, but I don't know if there's a possibility of getting an injunction or some kind of legal stay that would stop it from moving forward if the, you know, if the process was profoundly undemocratic. There might be some opportunity there. So I would just plan, you know, to follow the proper process, do what you are planning to do, which is go to the meeting in June and vote. And then if that is completely morally bankrupt, then, you know, take it into your own hands and make it as big of an issue as possible to stop them from forcing it on you. And we'll help in any way.
Just want to get a...
We were members, excuse me, we were members and went to a meeting, but there was security at the door that stopped us and would not let us in to vote at the last general meeting at the Lions Den.
And you were members?
We were members. We both had our members.
You had bought a membership?
We bought a membership, but the security at the door would not let us in.
You weren't on their list. You weren't on their top 10 list.
So, you know what? If you're willing, you need to make a formal complaint about that to the minister and to the LIN. As, you know, just even a 2-sentence letter that says just that. We're members, we paid our membership, we weren't allowed in.
I think with some clarification might need to be had here. Were you a member last year? Did you have a membership last year?
No.
Yeah.
That's the problem, because you have to buy your membership by March 31st. That's why we encouraged everybody to get their memberships by March 31st. That's why you weren't allowed to vote at the March 5th meeting. That's why they wouldn't allow me in either. But, yeah, and it's not a bad idea to complain regardless, because as was mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to, sorry Jim, when, this was new to me because I hadn't been to that many board meetings, to be perfectly honest with you. I went to one when I got on the board, and I think I went to the following one, and that was it for me until last June. But I was told at that meeting that you could always get a membership at the door going into the annual general meeting. That's how they wanted people to participate. Why did it change last year? So you were very well, I went in trying to buy a membership. They didn't allow me.
The more people they hear from, though, that complain that that was their expectation based on the past, etc., and they weren't allowed this year, the better. Because you don't want it just to be one set of 20 people that are making all the complaints. I mean, the more people who will put pen to paper, and even a two-sentence letter going to the LIN, Ben can help you with the addresses and so on, and the Minister of Health would be, I think, helpful. And for anyone that's happened to, people have to speak up, and it needs to be a lot of people in order to have an impact.
That was in the papers, that people had gone to vote, they were members, and they were refused entry. That was in the papers.
Yeah, I understand that, but you can't always believe what you read in the papers. I hate to have to say this out front, Jim.
Just give a bit of history. I was on the original committee way back when Charlie Robinson was administrator to try and have the totally appointed board of Anson General Hospital opened up. One of the people who was instrumental in having that opened up was Rainey Boucher. He was on the board at the time. So I think we got it down to we had 4 elected members. And I was also on many nominating committees under Dan O'Meara looking for people to become members of the board and to run as board members. And it was very difficult. Many times we had to go through the telephone book and then phone people and ask them if they would be interested because there was no groundswell. I'm hoping there is a groundswell this time around, but you have to be aware that they are going to use the bylaws that they have in place to affect what they want. So we have to be prepared for that. And I think we have to make sure that we participate. And one of the other things is that the board meetings, the regular board meetings are supposed to be open. So people should start attending them. Because it hasn't happened. They're supposed to advertise, they haven't. By their bylaws, they're supposed to have 2 meetings a year.
Open to the public.
To tell us and inform us as to what's going on. That hasn't happened, and I really don't know what kind of a turnout they would have had they had them in the past. But I think any kind of meeting that they're going to have in the future is going to be well attended.
I should hope so. They might need a bigger hall.
Yeah.
So I think we have to get engaged, not just, and that's why the memberships are sold the way they are. To prevent, and I'm not trying to protect them, or it's just the way it is. Memberships are sold with a date in mind so that a contentious issue doesn't just come up and dominate a particular board meeting or annual meeting. And that's what's happened last year, but it's carried on this year. And it's, they're not running the agenda this time. So they're going to be very defensive, I'm sure. But we have to be engaged and we have to be participating in it. And people that are sitting here that are very interested in getting on the board, make sure you let people know so they can be nominated. Because they're going to have a good reason. Their I's are going to have to be dotted, their T's crossed to reject anybody that the community says they want is on their board.
Absolutely.
And I just want to clarify something about Rainey and Colin being taken off. At the engagement meeting I attended, the reason wasn't that you asked questions. It was they were supposedly disrespectful to the female people on the board. It had nothing to do with asking questions, but that was what he said. And I think that if you could ever get a lawyer or a judge to agree, they've got the minutes, because they have people typing there all the time. And I wouldn't be surprised if it hadn't been recorded. So anything should be able to be found out.
Yeah, it should be able to, if they have the documentation online like they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Like Betty Lou says, they're not online. But we keep working on that. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
There's one thing I want to clarify on behalf of the coalition as well. I had heard Bruce Pitterkin mention a few things at some of the meetings, and I was quite shocked actually at what he alleged other people had said at meetings, etc. But if you read today's letter, he suggested that when we had the rally that there were some nasty things said during the rally. I could tell you that the coalition does not support any kind of form of discrimination whatsoever. I want to make that perfectly clear. And I would hope that the people of Iroquois Falls have more respect than that for that to happen ever again. We have ways to achieve our goals, and we will achieve our goals, but we're going to do it in a decent manner. Thank you very much. Good. And people, what I was just told is that people did tell them to keep it down or stop using that language, and that's good. That makes me proud. Are there any other questions for Natalie or for the coalition? Come on forward. Don't be shy. And by the way, I must comment, this is an awfully well-behaved meeting. I don't know what happened before I got back to town. I wish I had seen it all, though.
Yeah, you said a while ago that hospitals aren't allowed to run at a deficit. And I think that's where the problem is. Because what the government is trying to do is cut money, and they have to run the hospitals like a business. Now, to run it like a business, you have to have schedules. You can control your doctors, your fees, your hours. But on the other side of the equation, you cannot control people's health.
Yep.
And you can be sick at any time. You can, your pills are going to be crazy. Like if you have medications, if you have a heart problem or whatever, medication is crazy. Research is unreal. And if you cannot put people's health on a budget and control the time, you've just lost the control on half your equation. And if you're going to run your hospitals like a business to make a money maker, it doesn't matter whether you amalgamate, whether you downsize, whether you upgrade, destroy, or build. It's not going to work because you cannot put a price on people's health. And if you don't realize that now, it doesn't matter what you do, it's not going to work. So that's the money, that's where the problem lies, is the money. And the government is trying to cut down and operate like a business. And you cannot do that with people's health. But yeah, but
I think Natalie's got some information for us on that.
So I completely agree, obviously, with that. But also just a few facts and figures that are useful, I think. One is, despite all of the claims of health spending being out of control in Ontario and so on, we hear this all the time from this health minister. And you know, frankly, the truth is that health spending in Ontario is now 8th of 10 provinces in Canada. So on a per person basis, that's per capita. There's different ways you can measure spending, right? You can measure it as on a per person basis. That would sort of be a fairly true cost. We're 8th of 10 provinces in Canada. On as a percentage of our GDP, of our provincial GDP, our economic output, we're also 8th of 10 provinces. In terms of hospital spending, we're last of all the provinces in Canada. We have the fewest hospital beds of any province in Canada per person, so and we're far behind the rest of the country. We actually have cut more hospital beds than anywhere else in the country, and we're paying for it. I think we're paying for it primarily for seniors. losing the longer-term hospital beds, chronic care, what they call chronic care hospital beds. We're losing it in rural communities as they move the acute care services out of rural communities and centralize them into larger towns, forcing people to drive further. We're losing it as they delist things like physiotherapy, or they close the outpatient physiotherapy clinics, force people to go to private clinics where you have to pay $70 to $100 for your first visit, and then $50 to $70 for every visit thereafter. That was a service that used to be covered by OHIP. We're losing it as they cut the social workers and chiropodists and all of those services that used to be provided in hospitals that you now have to pay. And we're losing it as we download seniors, out of hospitals into long-term care and home care, where there is, when they have too heavy care for the number of staff that are available to provide care for them. Or there just isn't enough care, like in home care, and people go without. They wait for weeks and weeks and weeks before they actually get visits. When they do, it's not enough care, and the burden of caregiving falls to the other, usually elderly person, who themselves has, struggle to meet it. And so the consequence, I think, really hits seniors very hard. And, I think we should challenge them when they say, that health spending is too high, hospital spending is too high in Ontario. The evidence is actually that it's too low, that it's been declining now for years. Actually, since 1981, I went back to 1981, hospital funding has been declining as a share of both the provincial budget and of healthcare spending. It's not growing, it's declining as a share of our budget. And we're paying the costs for it out of pocket and in terms of reduced healthcare services. But thank you, I also agree with your core point, which is that this is a moral issue. We pool our money, we take care of each other. That's what Medicare is about. It's about being a community, and that we've decided that, unlike the United States, you're not on your own to sink or swim. We are going to take care of people, and that, that comes at a cost. And if we need to have a discussion about those costs, then let's have a real discussion about those costs and meeting them and ensuring that that money goes to service and not to, consultants and crazy CEO salaries and all the rest of it. Yeah.
And I want to add to that, she's identified the spending problem, or looked at the spending problem and says there really isn't a spending problem. But the reality is there's a revenue problem for the province. That's why we're in deficits, because we cut corporate taxes to the bone, and we're left to suffer the consequences of their decisions at Queen's Park and in Ottawa that have put us in the position that we're in today. And I know this is bigger stuff than what we're dealing with here, but that's a reality. And so when we have those discussions about, well, I don't want to pay another nickel in taxes, this is what's happened because we don't want to pay that extra nickel.
But it's taxes for the wealthy and for corporations that they've cut. Ontario has actually led the country in tax cuts. We've had the deepest tax cuts of anywhere. We now pay less, our corporations pay less tax than almost every jurisdiction in North America, in the United States and in Canada. And it's not amounting to business investment, but it is amounting to some very serious problems. We actually fund all our social programs less than anywhere else in the country. And so it means we have the highest university tuitions, the fewest hospital beds, the most user fees in elementary schools, a whole host of problems. Now, sorry, bit of a diversion.
Well, I think you stole part of what I was going to say.
Sorry.
You read your mind too.
I worked in the public sector for 30 years, and I can tell you from working there, and I agree with Natalie, each and every one of us as a taxpayer should take to pen and paper and write the minister, write the premier, write your opposition parties, especially them, because they might be the new government with the new policies. And I agree with you on funding. We pay more taxes now, we pay more user fees, and what does your government deliver to you as a taxpayer? Most services in this province have been contracted out. And I don't want to get off the health topic, but I'll give you a classic example. The drive test center in Timmins, where you go get your driver's license and your vision and all that stuff, is actually owned by a company from London, England. Highway maintenance in North Bay is a company from Australia. If you read the paper today where your hunting, fishing licenses and all that is to a company in Tennessee. So your tax dollars are leaving this province, a portion of it. Now grant you, these companies do hire people and all that good stuff, but a portion of that is leaving here.
Good point.
So to put the brakes on, it's only going to be the people that's going to have to stand up and say we've had enough and we want to go back to use delivering something to us, because right now the government delivers very little to you. Other than putting repayments on hydro bills for gas plants and whatever.
I think. Go ahead, thanks.
I just want to give you a little bit of history of the hospital board and the game that they were playing. And I could recognize what was going on before that meeting was called on amalgamation, that there was no way that we could postpone this, because they had everything going for them, including a very high-priced lawyer from Toronto that talked there for 20 minutes or half an hour. He lost everybody and nobody knew what he was talking about. It's typical of going to a hospital board meeting when the auditor gives a financial report. I have always gone to the hospital board meetings for many, many years, and to say that the participation was very limited would be stretching it a little bit, because generally speaking, we had to go and get some old fella out of bed in a wheelchair and bring him in so that we had enough for a quorum. Once we had the quorum, the CEO would give us a little breakdown, and then the auditor would give us a rundown on the finances, and that would be the end of the meeting. So when I could see what was going to happen with this amalgamation vote, I thought there's got to be something we can do. With a special meeting to vote on amalgamation, that's all exactly that they're going to talk about, or that's all they're going to deal with. So I thought to myself, maybe we could amend that motion. That's quite legal under the circumstances. When I approached the chair with it, they turned to the high-priced lawyer sitting there. He said, I don't believe you can do that. But he said, I'll look it up in my book. So it was kind of embarrassing for all the board to be sitting there with their high-priced lawyer, and here's an old 86-year-old cod up there asking a question, and he can't answer it. So it was quite amusing. For 1/2 hour, he fiddled around there, and they finally came to the conclusion that yes, we had to vote on the amendment, and that's why we're here tonight.
Can you explain your amendment to Natalie's and for everybody else here, what the amendment said to the amendment to the motion?
Well,
pretty plain to me.
I wanted to make the motion was to vote on amalgamation, either yes or no.
Yep.
And that's what everybody was there, and they had the table stacked with members from out of town and so on, that somehow or another they apparently got memberships which nobody else could get after during the year, but that's beside the point. But I got up and I said I would move an amendment to that motion that we put this off until the general meeting so that we can vote on it at that. Now if I have a seconder for that, we'll have the vote. I had a seconder. I had a seconder. I forget who it was, but
it was her.
I thank her tonight for that. It was rather embarrassing. However, my main object in that whole thing was that what they were doing was not fair, because the community members that wanted to vote should have been allowed to vote. And they thought by doing what they were doing that they could get away with it. Unfortunately, they didn't, and that's why we're here tonight. Now, what I would like to do, I really appreciate the presentation that we've had tonight by such a talented person. However, Ben, you have requested the hospital board to come forward with reasons why we should amalgamate. I would suggest that if they do come and call a meeting with all the facts, that everybody here tonight will come and listen to those facts. And if those facts are approved, if they think that that there's something to it, that they vote on what they hear from the other side. Now, we have heard the side tonight of the coalition, which was an excellent presentation. Now it's up to them to make a presentation so that we can divide or decide amongst ourselves what's fair. And I think that's fair with everybody, and I thank you very much.
With adding to what, it's Mr. Corcoran, right? With what Mr. Corcoran was just saying, I'm a very simple person, and to me it doesn't make a lot of sense that we always say there's strength in numbers, and as you were saying, there's a bunch of hospitals that have gone through this and are going through this, and as well as we are. Is there not a way that we can all get together under that one umbrella and say, enough, we're not doing this, it doesn't make sense, and so we don't have to do this? Yeah.
We're trying to forge some opportunities to do that.
Right.
We have a conference call with reps from about a dozen communities on Monday or Tuesday of next week. We asked Ben if he would join to talk about doing one large activity at Queen's Park next month on this. But we're also gonna hold a conference, like a kind of get together strategy summit kind of meeting about this issue with the municipalities and all of the local groups that are working on it to discuss more deeply things like you're suggesting, but also things like
the simplicity of it
all. What are our legal options? Can we somehow pool resources to look at a class action, or how are we going to? That's
exactly what I'm wondering. Why can we not pretend it's a lawsuit and all get together on that same boat and say, this is what we want, this is how we're going to get it, and if we're all for it, then let's go for that, and then you can determine if it's plausible, if people want to do this or not.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's a lot of talking and nothing's happening, and it's frustrating. It is. Like I said, to me, it just doesn't make sense. Surely there's a simpler way of doing this.
Well, unfortunately, it's not totally easy to de-amalgamate. Like the towns that are trying to de-amalgamate, it's not like the minister is going to easily say yes.
That's right.
So they have to mount enough of a
fuss. But the louder we are, right?
Absolutely, that's right. And there absolutely is, I agree with everything that you said. So it's not that easy, but it is absolutely doable.
Right.
And it will, I agree. We need to pull together and figure out how to do it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
A quick question for Natalie. I sat on a board for 9 years not a hospital board, but a board for the Ministry of Health, that answered to the Ministry of Health and now to the Northeast Lynn. In this incident here in Iroquois Falls, one thing I've noticed that most of the public information coming out is not coming from the board itself. It's coming from the CEO. From your experience, is that what happens in these other amalgamated processes that went on in other parts of the province?
Yeah, the CEOs tend to be, well, in a lot of cases, the CEO is the president of the board. It's president and CEO, which I think is absolutely wrong. But you see, the problem is, it's not just the amalgamation, but with the changes in the bylaws, these self-appointing hospital boards truly are controlled much more by the CEO. There's much less accountability. If you have a CEO who is a bad apple in a community, when you have a self-appointing board, that CEO, manages to protect themselves and carry on for, quite some time, and that's happened in other places. So it's a bit of a mixture of, you know, of both the, you know, the amalgamation, allowing them to change the bylaws, rewrite bylaws for a new corporation, et cetera. And yeah, no, the CEOs are spokespeople all over the place.
Okay, that kind of answers it, because the board that I sat on, the CEO answered to the board.
However, normally, if correspondence goes to the board chair, not the CEO, answers that, in my experience.
Yes, well,
Which is, I don't.
whatever issue came before the board, sometimes it was introduced by the CEO, but if there was something that had to go out to the public, it went out by the chair of the board, under the approval of the members of the board. And
yeah.
From what I'm seeing in this situation, our board is silent, and the chair is silent.
That's unfortunate.
Interesting.
And it is, it's terribly unfortunate.
Yeah. And what's even more unfortunate is the fact that we got public dollars being used to sue community members, taxpayers. And, you know, today, the big ad in the Enterprise, I'm sure wasn't cheap, and I saw the Mix logo on top of that. I imagine that we're paying for that too. And unfortunately, we can all read between the lines on that one. Mike? No, you better go to the mic. You got to go to the mic.
I just have one comment to make, and it's not a question. We know that there's one person here in this room that is a current member of the board, the former chair. She's sitting right back there, Wendy. Hello. I don't care what you report back to Bruce, whatever you say, whatever you're writing down, your conclusion must be that this community does not want the amalgamation.
You want to speak? Yeah. Well then, get up, get to the mic. We want to get out of here.
I know, me too. I actually just wanted to make a comment. I know that we're talking a lot about the amalgamation, and it is paramount, but I think that something else has really happened in this community, and that is that when people are being silenced because they're making note or comment to their superior, to their co-workers about care, patient care, lack thereof, or talking about concerns with their job, perhaps maybe even becoming stressed at work because they may be doing something that may not be right and they're being silenced or bullied into intimidation or to submission. That's a really sad day. And there is 9 people being sued who don't even know all of us because they're standing up to say, you know what, it's wrong. It's wrong. So thank you to you 9 people who are standing up. Thank you. Thank you. We gotta go because Michael's gonna kill me. Bye.
Thanks for coming.
I would just like to address the reason for my presence here tonight. This meeting is open to the public. It's open to the people of Iroquois Falls.
Absolutely.
I am still a citizen of this community, and that's why I'm here.
We're glad you're here. We're glad you're here, Wendy.
I came here with an open mind. I wanted to hear what Natalie had to say from the perspective of the Ontario Health Coalition, and that was my sole purpose of being here.
Appreciate
the fact that I'm going to report back to anybody, I will tell them what the meeting was like. I mean, there's no question. But, you know, my reason for being here is the same reason all of you other people are here tonight.
And you have that right.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming. All right, we're going to try to wrap this up unless there's more questions because it's warm and I know that some people need to go. It's almost 9 o'clock. I just want to say that we will post our contact information for the LHINs, for the CEO at the LHINs, and for the Minister of Long-Term Care or Minister of Health and Long-Term Care. For those of you who don't have a computer at home and check it out on your Facebook. We'll probably buy an ad. I'm going to have to pass that by the coalition, but maybe we'll buy an ad and just put it up there and make sure that people know. We can distribute it around the community. Somehow you will find out who to write to, and we would encourage you to continue to write. Lance?
The good people in the coalition are seeking donations that can be sold to help cover the legal fees. If you look around the room, there's a lot of elderly people in here who may want to give things away. Has there any consideration been given to picking up things and delivering them to the location so that that would be off their mind?
I think there's opportunity for that, but we'd have to organize it, Lance. Good point. I know that some stuff has been picked up, but I can tell you that our warehouse at this point is overflowing. So we need some more storage. If anybody's got it, please come forward with your...
I'd like to thank you, Ben and Natalie. Me, I'd just like a comment. The coalition, they've been very civil, gentlemen, and they're keeping they're cool. But how come our CEO is allowed to spread vicious lies in our local newspaper? And for those who don't know me, I'm Christine's dad. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, first it started with $41,000. You all know what I'm talking about, I hope? Then it went to $1,000. And now she's being accused of lying that she was not escorted, which is lies spread through our CEO, through our local newspaper. First of all, I'd like to comment, I don't have that paper anymore. And they asked me a reason why I canceled. And I told them, if I want to read lies, I'm going to buy the Inquirer. Oh, that's... Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to say one thing to that, if that's all right. I've been doing this for 15 years, really. I've been the director for 13, and I was on the board for, I don't know, 4 or 5 or something before that. And in all of the time that I've traveled Ontario, and Ben can attest to that, it's incessant. We follow all the newspaper stories that we can on what's happening in hospitals. I've never seen anything like that in a local paper about an individual person, ever.
See, I had to say something tonight because I was approached by a certain individual in town, and he says, well, it's written in the paper, it's got to be true.
Oh my God.
He didn't know who I was. And there are people in town here thinking like it. If it's written in the paper, it's true. Like you were saying, Ben, don't believe everything you read in the paper.
That's right.
That's a long-standing truism. That's a long-standing truth. All right, people, so thank you again for coming out. We really appreciate it. And we will keep you posted. Thank you.
Hey? Oh, I've had lots of practice.